In today's World Insight, a nod to closer relations as Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva does the rounds on a state visit to China. What does the visit mean for bilateral ties and for multipolar global governance as two of the biggest emerging market economies in the world? And here's our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you live from Beijing. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva is on a state visit to China from Thursday to Saturday this week. Both China and Brazil are biggest emerging market economies, which are both BRICS member states. What does the Brazilian leader's visit mean for bilateral ties, and how can the two countries pursue South-South cooperation under a multilateral mechanism? Before getting down to our discussion about this, take a look at this backgrounder.
Brazil is back. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva is looking to reposition Brazil as a global go-between and deal broker as he visits China, the biggest developing country in the world. After holding talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping, the two leaders signed around 20 bilateral agreements. President Xi seeks to deepen pragmatic cooperation and steadily carry out existing major cooperation projects. That's on top of exploring the potential for cooperation in agriculture, energy, infrastructure, aerospace, science and technology innovation, and joint efforts toward the green and digital economy, clean energy, and welcome more high-quality Brazilian products into the Chinese market. President Lula leads a large delegation of over 200 people. Earlier on Thursday, he also attended the inauguration ceremony of the new head of the BRICS lender, the New Development Bank. The bank is seen as a symbolic achievement for BRICS cooperation. Just weeks ago, China and Brazil reached an agreement to ditch the US dollar in favor of using their own currencies for transaction.
Mas por que banco como os BRICS não pode?
Why can't a bank like the BRICS Bank have a currency to finance trade between Brazil and China, between Brazil and other BRICS countries? It is difficult because people are badly used to it, and everyone depends on a single currency.
Porque todo mundo depende de uma única moeda.
Since the establishment of diplomatic ties between China and Brazil in 1974, economic and trade relations have made great progress. Brazil is the biggest recipient of Chinese investment in Latin America, while China is Brazil's biggest export market, buying tens of billions of dollars worth of soybeans, beef, and iron ore.
Tá tudo bem encaminhado para que essa safra 2020-2023
we are projecting that in the 2023 harvest, we will export between 100 and 200 containers per week to the Chinese market, not counting other Asian markets that are also interested in our products.
Lula's visit carries the great expectation that China and Brazil will usher in a new era for bilateral relations and build a positive global momentum. Against the backdrop of global challenges, the two nations have deepened cooperation in several areas in the political, economic, and cultural spheres and set a good example for South-South cooperation.
Joining us on the panel in Sao Paulo, Jose Ricardo, who is the co-chairman and CEO of LIGI China. In Beijing, Karen Vazquez, a Brazilian economist who's a scholar at Fudan University. She's also the executive director of the Assistant Dean and also associate professor at OP Jindo Global University. And also in Shanghai, Jiang Xueshi, director of the Center for Latin American Studies at Shanghai University. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the program. Now, the two sides are talking about strategic cooperation. To you, Ms. Vazquez, tell me more exactly what strategies are you thinking about and having in mind since you've been living both in China and Brazil, looking at the bilateral relations? Ms. Vazquez?
Yes, I think the visit, Lula's visit, is an example of the new momentum that bilateral relations are gaining. We've had an interregnum of 4 years in which our trade grew, but we haven't made fully use of the potential of our cooperation in other fields, such as science, technology, cultural aspects. Now we're entering a new stage of our relations in which we can not only grow in numbers, but also explore the full potential of this partnership in other fields, including for the structural reforms that Brazil wants to take forward, as for instance, the industrialization based on a more inclusive, based on a more green and a more sustainable way.
Professor Zhang, you've been following the growth of Latin American economies for the past decades. Tell me more about this so-called strategic thinking and perspective in terms of bilateral cooperation. What do you think are the strategies and the backdrop of this strategy?
Yes, you're right. Between China and Brazil, we have the comprehensive strategic partnership. By saying comprehensive, it means our cooperation covers all the areas. I would say that from the high in the sky down to the earth. And the strategic means the cooperation between our sides will not be affected by any other factors, okay? So our cooperation will move forward on a win-win base. So over the past 3 or 2 decades, China's cooperation between with Brazil has been approved that it's really comprehensive strategic partnership. And if we go to Brazil, you will notice that you will see lots of signs, symbols of China everywhere. I would say that in today's Brazil, you cannot move forward without China.
All right. Mr. Ricardo, now a quote coming from the Chinese leader suggesting China is committed to developing its relations with Brazil from a long-term and strategic perspective. Now, understanding the statement coming from the Brazilian perspective, exactly what are we talking about, the strategic perspective? What are the strategic perspectives?
Thank you, Tianwei, for having me at World Insight. China and Brazil relations, it's a solid and a very fruitful relationship. Now with the visit of the President Lula, together with several government officials, congressmen, Brazilian entrepreneurs, we are moving into a new era of relationship. China and Brazil, they are completing in August 2023, 49 years of a successful relationship, not only in terms of commerce and trade, foreign direct investment, but also in terms of the government relations and also in terms of the education in the cultural area. It's important to highlight that China and Brazil do have a relationship based on mutual respect and reciprocity. Judging by that, we know, everybody knows that the trade between Brazil and China in 2022 was of 150.4 billion US dollar, and in the last 20 years, the relationship, the foreign direct investment of China into Brazil was of 80 billion US dollars, which means it's a successful commercial and trade relationship. But besides the traditional relationship, judging by the export from Brazil of commodities such as petrol, iron ore, soybean, cellulose, and animal protein, Brazil and China, we are discussing in a very respectful way under the 5 principles of Pacific coexistence, a way to develop the basis for cooperation in terms of sustainability and also technology. Mm-hmm. When we talk about the Chinese 5-year plan, there are 3 basic pillars, which are inclusion, innovation, and sustainability. So Brazil is eager to receive more technology from China, especially in terms of the clean energy, solar and wind power, in terms of electric cars, in terms also on digital economy. When we talk about digital economy, we are talking about digital infrastructure, e-commerce, live commerce, which is still very incipient in Brazil.
Yeah.
So there are several sectors in terms of technology and sustainability to be developed between both countries.
Right. Professor Jiang, over the past decade or so, we've seen the relationship going through some challenging time, to use an adjective. And now, how sustainable do you see this strategic partnership is between China and Brazil? Will that be able to survive and thrive even with turbulences of the world?
Well, I would say that this kind of comprehensive strategic partnership will continue to move forward. Of course, in order to further promote our bilateral relationship, we have to deal with several challenges. First of all, I would like to point out that we need to deal with the so-called U.S. effect, because the U.S. policy towards Latin America, including Brazil, has been dominated by the so-called Monroe Doctrine, okay? And secondly, I think we have to push forward our cooperation, particularly in the trade and investment areas. Well, we must still stick to our principle that win-win. Now, I have often heard some of my friends from Brazil complaining that China only wants to purchase raw materials. China should buy some non-traditional products. But I often ask them, what can you sell to China? And China's market is big. But, well, China's market is big, but your products must be competitive. So that's why I often told my friends from Brazil, including our guest here, Karen, that we need to do something to help Brazilian products to be sold to the Chinese market.
Karen, since your name is already called upon by the professor, so please go ahead and explain to us about whether the relationship will be sustainable, be able to survive and thrive the turbulences. Of course, the turbulences are coming from very different directions.
First of all, I didn't say thank you, Tianwei, for inviting me to the show. And it's a great pleasure not only to be on the show, but to share this discussion with two very good friends and professionals, which I admire profoundly. Answering the question, 2 points. I think in terms of the strategic direction of our relations, from a Brazilian perspective, what I see is more clarity of how China can be a partner in the transition to a low-carbon economy. And this is a very clear goal that this new government has, and it's trying to promote over the next years. So I think that's a quite sensitive change in the narrative, in which now we see China as a partner in the transformation of many industries in the reindustrialization based on new elements, right? On the same token, Brazil is also a partner for China in the making of the new era. The two countries not only have a strong bilateral relationship, but they also share a strong and important role in the world in promoting common values and shared prosperity. My second point is in terms of the elements that will secure the sustainability of this relationship going forward, in which I see them thriving, actually. I think the first one is the leadership on both sides, on both China and Brazil, who share common values in terms of a world that needs to be based on a shared prosperity, that needs more inclusive, and that needs to be more sustainable. I think on both sides, governments are very well equipped with the human resources to push this leadership vision. And a very important element that we cannot disregard is the growing civil society, academics, and other professionals in Brazil. I can tell from experience that are growing in numbers and are increasingly shaping and building this relationship. So I'm quite positive in the long-term sustainability and a prosperous future for this relationship.
All right, let's talk about some of the key elements. First of all, China and Brazil are both members of the BRICS, so-called the new developing countries and emerging economies. What does that mean? How much opportunities in the near future would that create in terms of multilaterally and also bilaterally for promoting multipolar world? Mr. Ricardo. Mr. Ricardo.
China and Brazil, they have a bright future, right? As we already mentioned, we do have, Brazil is considered by China as a global strategic partner. Few countries in the world are considered global strategic partners with China, such as Brazil. Brazil and China, although Brazil has not signed the Belt and Road Initiative yet, we do have a Sino-Brazilian high-level commission on consultation, which in this commission, that it's a political mechanism between Brazil and China, there are several topics, several sectors, which are discussed in 12 groups, including economic, including trade, education, aerospace, infrastructure, agriculture, finance, and so on. So there are good communication channels between Brazil and China. And when we talk about BRICS, especially if today, Tian Wei, if the countries decided to stop with this multilateral platform, the golden key, the best result of BRICS was the establishment of the New Development Bank, because the New Development Bank is a bank which is gaining daily more muscles, and the New Development Bank somehow gave voice to Brazil, Russia, India, China, and also South Africa. So the New Development Bank is providing to developing countries good substantial loans for interesting projects, especially related to the sustainability. So there are several indicators that the relationship between Brazil and China is indirectly a part of what President Xi Jinping says about the 两个一百年, because China is building a strong country, and President Xi Jinping always says that we live in a global village and it's time to share, to provide a common shared future for all humanity, right? So China is developing bilateral relations with the world, including Brazil in Latin America, and also multilateral dialogue, especially developing a Pacific, promoting a Pacific development and being always pragmatic.
Okay, so we want to focus on the specifics. Maybe that would bring our viewers from all over the world better ideas of exactly what we are talking about here. One is, of course, the BRICS countries, how much cooperation is there? And the other thing, of course, is the Mercosur, Mr. Jiang, that involving both Brazil and also some of those in the Latin American and Caribbean countries like Uruguay, Paraguay, and some of the other economies there. So how much do you see potential there in terms of cooperation? Professor Jiang.
Well, I think as far as I know, some of the Chinese people, including some Chinese scholars, have some kind of misunderstanding about the definition, the notion of the so-called cooperation between Mercosur and China. Some people even argue that why shouldn't we have a free trade, so-called FTA between China and Mercosur? No, that's not possible, because Paraguay is a country that has no diplomatic relationship with China. Okay, so it is impossible. So secondly, regarding BRICS, well, we often talk about the BRICS cooperation. Now, I mean only the cooperation among all the 5 members should be considered as BRICS cooperation. Otherwise, it's something like only bilateral relationship. So now China-Brazil cooperation is not a BRICS cooperation. China-Brazil cooperation is a kind of a bilateral cooperation, okay? But having said that, I would argue that BRICS cooperation is very promising. Its future is very bright. I'm very confident about that.
Go to you, Ms. Vasquez. Now, Brazilian politics have changed dramatically since the president coming back to power earlier this year. So what is the trend of politics in your country? And with that as a reality, how much ambience and possibility does it create for further geopolitical and political ties between China and Brazil? Now, in which direction do you see that the two capitals might be able to come to consensus on some of the most critical and eye-catching issues that the world is looking at right now?
Right. With regards to the domestic political scenario, I think there are 2 words that describe well what we're living through. The first one is reconstruction. So it's a time to take stock of what has been done, and in many cases, even rebuild many of the policies that have been dismantled in the past. And the second one is transformation. So it's not just about rebuilding how we were, but going forward and making the country that we want to be. And I think that very much dictates the kinds of partnerships that we are going to look around the world, and including China, including the US, and including any other country in the world, which is actually a trademark of Lula's foreign policy in his first term, in his second term, and it will not be different in the third term. So the word non-alignment or active non-alignment defines well this line that continues over the past through the present and will probably set the north to the future. I believe that very much we are going to look into diversifying partnerships and looking, yes, for the best partnerships to promote the priorities that the country needs to promote, the development priorities, but not only looking internally in terms of the partnerships that we need to transform, rebuild and transform our country, but also the best partnerships that will help us play a positive, play a constructive role in the world.
Professor Jiang, same question to you, but also with a precondition, meaning that all of the economies worldwide are suffering as a result of the 3 years of the pandemic. And also we're likely to see not necessarily a quick rebound in this, at least the rest of the year. So with that in mind, how much do you see China and Brazil will be able to go their ways in terms of cooperation and be able to change the world, as the both presidents are very vigorously trying to illustrate the world that they have in mind?
Well, I would say that there are some kind of possibilities. First of all, China should continue to do trade in a more vast way, to buy more and sell more from Brazil. And secondly, China can make more investment in Brazil. And finally, China can have some kind of technology transfer with Brazil. And I believe that Lula will sign the Belt Road Initiative cooperation agreement. So with that agreement, that means Brazil will have stronger political will to cooperate with China. So I think cooperation between the two sides will be quite promising. And particularly after the pandemic, so Brazil needs to push forward its economic growth. And China can offer a kind of helping hand for Brazil.
Mr. Ricardo, Brazil is situated in a very important geopolitical and geographical place, shall I say. And therefore, how to see Brazil's relations with China, with the United States, for example, which is in the neighborhood, and some of the other Western economies. It's a very interesting question. How do you see the new president is treading his way during the first few months? And what are these messages that he expressed this time during his Beijing visit might be of reference for the others to try to figure out some answers?
One of the lessons that Brazil needs to learn from China, Tianwei, is that we need to be pragmatic. So in this President Lula's third mandate, we do have to be pragmatic. The government officials and the Brazilian entrepreneurs are very excited with this new chapter of China, Brazil in a new area of a relationship. And I can give as an example of this new era of relationship the direct use of the UN on this bilateral import and export and also in terms of foreign direct investment. Brazil, in this 100 days, shown to the world two things. Firstly, is taking the words stated and highlighted by Professor Karim Vasquez of reconstruction and transformation. I would say reshaping, because we are reshaping our international relations, not only with China, but also with US, Argentina, Uruguay, that President Lula already visited in this first 100 days. But also besides reshaping, we need to emphasize the boosting more international business. So in terms of the Sino-Brazilian relationship, China is the biggest trader for Brazil since 2009. We are increasing, if you compare, for example, in the early 2000s, in 2003 specifically speaking, the trade between Brazil and China was of 2.3 billion, and last year we finished with 150.4 billion US dollars. So we do have traditional trade, but we also have this basis for cooperation in this new era, because China has 5G telecommunication, the skills in terms of intelligent manufacturing, the sustainable agriculture, AI, artificial intelligence, IoT, drones, rovers, and etc. So there are huge opportunities for Brazil to develop its relationship with China and other countries that want to do business with us.
Okay. Before we go, we only have less than 40 seconds. We'd like the other two guests to say what are the strategic balance that the two countries are likely to keep, and how, in that regard, they can work together. Let's go to Ms. Vasquez. Briefly, 20 seconds, thanks.
Play a positive role in the world, a constructive and positive role in issues that affect us all: climate change, poverty, hunger. I think that's the best way that we can promote balance, by building bridges and playing a positive role.
Yeah, global issues, let's work on together. Professor Jiang.
Yes, China and Brazil can cooperate on the bilateral stage as well as on the so-called multilateral stage. And let me repeat again, well, Brazil need to do something to pay attention to the U.S., which will drive wage between China
Jose
and
Ricardo,
Brazil.
Karen Costa Vasquez, and Jiang Xueshi, we're really running out of time. Thank you so much for being with us. You can find us on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. I'm Tianwei. Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend. Bye for now.